That's the little bit we could afford to pour out for them.
These bikers aren't standing in a rival gang's cemetery. They're not here for revenge. They're here to party with their dead brother, the same way he used to party with them. They take swigs of beer and spit it onto the headstone. They sprinkle cocaine on the grave. They pour liquor onto the dirt. This isn't disrespect. This is tradition, and that's not all. Someone wheels out a motorcycle, his bike, the dead man's Harley. They rev the engine so loud that the ground shakes. This is how the Ching-A-Lings say goodbye. But to understand who they are, you have to go back to where it all began. In the mid-1960s, the Ching-A-Lings were a Puerto Rican street gang running blocks in the South Bronx. They had territory, they had muscle, they had a name that people in the neighborhood knew not to say too loudly. But they were watching something happen across America. Motorcycle clubs were rising. The Hells Angels had exploded out of California, spreading chapters across the country and into Europe. The Outlaws were consolidating power in the Midwest. The Pagans were locking down the East Coast. These clubs had structure, hierarchy, and a code that bound members for life. They had lawyers and accountants and networks that stretched across state lines. They were building empires on two wheels. The Ching-A-Lings saw the future, and they wanted in. But they didn't want to start from scratch. They didn't want to spend years as prospects, earning their way into someone else's club. They had a different idea. In 1966, they found the New Rochelle Motorcycle Club, a small group of riders, legitimate bikers with patches and bylaws, but no real muscle behind them. The Ching-A-Lings made their move. What happened next was a patchover, but not the usual kind. Normally, a bigger club absorbs a smaller one. The smaller club surrenders its identity and becomes part of the larger organization. The Ching-A-Lings flipped the script. The street gang swallowed the motorcycle club. They brought the numbers. They brought the violence. They brought a reputation that the New Rochelle riders couldn't match. When the dust settled, the New Rochelle Motorcycle Club no longer existed. In its place stood the Ching-A-Lings MC. A South Bronx street gang had just transformed itself into a one-percenter motorcycle club. Now they needed to look the part. They kept the name and built a mythology around it. CFFC became their motto. Ching-A-Ling forever, forever Ching-A-Ling. They added the number 314 to their patches, a code for the initiated. 3 for C, the third letter of the alphabet. 14 for N, the 14th. Ching-A-Lings Nomads, hidden in plain sight. In the center of the patch, 3 letters, FTW. But the symbol that made people stop and stare wasn't a number or an acronym. Some Ching-A-Lings patches featured an iron cross. Others went further. They featured a swastika, worn by Puerto Rican and black men from the South Bronx. It made no sense until you understood the logic. The Ching-A-Lings weren't the only ones doing it. The Savage Skulls and Savage Nomads, 2 other Bronx gangs from the same era, wore Nazi helmets and swastikas and created ranks called Gestapo. None of them were white supremacist. They were street kids taking the world's most hated symbol and wearing it as armor. The message was simple. You already treat us like the enemy, so we'll become your worst nightmare. It wasn't ideology, it was provocation. And it worked. The Ching-A-Lings had gone from street corner hustlers to a fully patched motorcycle club with colors that made people cross the street. They had structure, identity, and a reputation that was growing by the day. But they weren't welcome everywhere. In the early days, the club ran in Greenwich Village, mixing with the artists, hippies, and radicals who made Manhattan's counterculture scene what it was. By the early 1970s, that changed. The Ching-A-Lings were pushed out of the village and forced to find somewhere else. They landed in the South Bronx, Hughes Avenue, near 182nd Street. The South Bronx of the 1970s was collapsing. Buildings burned night after night as landlords hired arsonists to torch their own properties for insurance money. The city stopped picking up garbage. Cops stopped patrolling. Entire blocks turned to rubble. In 1977, during a World Series game at Yankee Stadium, a TV helicopter caught an apartment building on fire just blocks from the stadium. The announcer said what everyone already knew. "The Bronx is burning." The rest of America saw a punchline. The Ching-A-Lings saw opportunity. They set up their clubhouse on Hughes Avenue and made that block theirs, not just in name. If you wanted to do business on Hughes Avenue, you dealt with the Ching-A-Lings first. In 1975, a man named James Hunter rented a storefront near their clubhouse. He didn't understand how things worked on that block. The club's president, Pedro Lamboy, and vice president, Chuck Zito, paid him a visit. Whatever happened in that conversation led to both of them getting arrested for harassment and weapons possession. The message traveled fast. Hughes Avenue belonged to the Ching-A-Lings. 20 years later, an Irish construction company learned the same lesson but with a different outcome. They wanted to build low-income housing on Hughes Avenue at 181st Street. Local community groups told them it wasn't possible. Too dangerous. Too many people didn't want outsiders coming in. The Irish reached out to the Ching-A-Lings instead. They met with a sergeant at arms and explained what they wanted to do. The Ching-A-Lings listened, and then they gave the green light. No extortion, no shakedowns. Just a handshake and a promise that the block would stay peaceful while the work got done. The housing got built. The Irish went home. One of them later wrote about the experience online. No bullshit, no backstabbing, just straight up looking after the block. It's such a pity that local neighborhoods don't have such honorable people like the Ching-A-Lings to look after them. The city had abandoned the South Bronx. The police came when they felt like it, if they came at all. In that vacuum, the Ching-A-Lings became the law. You had a problem on Hughes Avenue, but you didn't dial 911. You talked to the club. The cops tried to break them. They raided the clubhouse multiple times. One raid destroyed the building entirely. The Ching-A-Lings hired lawyers, took the city to court, and won an out-of-court settlement. They expanded beyond the Bronx over the years. Chapters appeared in other states. But the Bronx was always home. Hughes Avenue was always the heart. But holding territory comes at a price. And for the Ching-A-Lings, that price was paid in blood. The violence. In 1976, a 17-year-old member of the Ching-A-Lings was shot and killed by a New Jersey state trooper. His name never made it into public records. The details of what happened that day have been lost to time. All that remains is the fact. A teenager wearing Ching-A-Lings colors died at the hands of law enforcement, and the club never forgot him. That was just the beginning. On June 15, 1990, about half a dozen people got into an argument outside 2078 Arthur Avenue in East Tremont. Two Ching-A-Lings members, Sam Sequino and another brother, showed up. Then gunfire erupted. When the shooting stopped, both Ching-A-Lings were bleeding on the pavement. Sequino had taken a bullet to the stomach. Paramedics rushed him to Jacoby Medical Center, but the damage was too severe. He died before morning. The other members survived. Sam Sequino's death added another name to the list of fallen brothers. His Harley got revved at his graveside. Beer got poured on his headstone. The Ching-A-Lings kept riding, because that's what the life demanded. The violence cost them members they loved and created enemies who wanted them dead. But it also built something that couldn't be broken, a reputation that made people think twice before crossing them. That reputation attracted a certain kind of man. Men who wanted to be part of something real. Men who weren't afraid of the life. The Hells Angels connection. Of all the men who wore Ching-A-Lings colors, one name rose above the rest. Chuck Zito. You might recognize him. He played Chucky Pancamo, the Italian mob enforcer, on HBO's Oz for 5 seasons. He showed up in Sons of Anarchy. He worked as a celebrity bodyguard for Sylvester Stallone, Mickey Rourke, and Sean Penn. But before Hollywood, before the fame, before any of that, Chuck Zito was vice president of the Ching-A-Lings, and his journey from the Bronx to the red carpet runs straight through the outlaw biker world. Zito was born in 1953 in the Bronx, the second of 3 children. His father, Charles Zito Sr., was a professional boxer who fought under the name Al La Barba, 228 professional matches. By the time Chuck was a teenager, fighting was second nature. He grew up in the Bronx and New Rochelle, surrounded by the kind of streets that didn't forgive weakness. At 17, he dropped out of New Rochelle High School and married his high school sweetheart, Kathy. He needed money, so he became a refrigerator mechanic. He also worked as a bouncer at Cafe Central on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. But the straight life didn't fit. Zito needed something more. In 1974, he founded the New Rochelle Motorcycle Club, a small group of guys who liked to ride. Nothing serious, no criminal ambitions, just friends on bikes. Then he met the Ching-A-Lings. They were a Puerto Rican street gang from the South Bronx that had transformed into a one-percenter motorcycle club. They had territory, they had muscle, they had a reputation that made people nervous, and they saw something in Zito. The 2 clubs merged. The New Rochelle Motorcycle Club ceased to exist. In its place, Zito found himself wearing Ching-A-Lings colors. It was like stepping into another world. One day he was a mechanic with a motorcycle hobby. The next, he was vice president of one of New York's most violent outlaw biker gangs, standing next to President Pedro Lamboy. The trouble came fast. June 14, 1975. Zito and Lamboy paid a visit to James Hunter, a man who had rented a storefront near the Ching-A-Lings clubhouse. Hunter didn't understand how things worked on that block. Whatever happened in that conversation, both Zito and Lamboy ended up arrested for harassment and possession of dangerous weapons. October 1976. Zito had been renting an apartment in New Rochelle from a landlord named Arthur Jacobs. They got into a dispute over Zito's membership in the club. 2 days after the lease was broken, someone firebombed the apartment. Arson, retaliation, Zito's life in flames, literally. June 1977. A bar fight broke out. Zito allegedly grabbed a bar stool and attacked a police officer with it. Another arrest. Another charge. August 1979. Police pulled Zito over for speeding in Harrison, New York. When they searched the car, they found a stolen pistol, ammunition, and brass knuckles. He pleaded guilty to third-degree criminal possession of a weapon and got 5 years probation. This was the life. Arrests, arson, weapons charges, violence. This was what it meant to be a Ching-A-Ling in 1970s New York. But Zito wanted more. The Ching-A-Lings were respected in the Bronx, but Zito had his eyes on something bigger. He had never stopped boxing. He started training at Gramercy Gym in Manhattan, a place where serious fighters came to work. One day, he noticed another boxer training nearby. The man moved like a professional, disciplined, dangerous. His name was Sandy Alexander. He was a professional boxer. He was also president of the Hells Angels New York City chapter. Zito introduced himself. For Zito, meeting Alexander was like meeting a god. He had grown up watching Hells Angels movies. Hells Angels on Wheels, Hells Angels 69. To him, the Angels weren't just another motorcycle club. They were the elite of the elite, the number 1. They were the pinnacle of the outlaw biker world. He wanted in, and he had an idea. What if he didn't join alone? What if he brought the entire Ching-A-Lings with him? Zito went back to the club and pitched the proposal. Prospect for the Hells Angels. Become part of the biggest motorcycle club in the world. Stop being a regional crew and join a global organization. The membership voted. They agreed to try. The prospecting process began. The Ching-A-Lings did what was asked of them. They followed the rules. They waited. They expected that when the process ended, they would all be wearing Hells Angels patches. They were wrong. When the verdict came, the Hells Angels accepted 2 men, Chuck Zito and 1 other. Everyone else was rejected. The reasons were never officially stated. They didn't need to be. Everyone understood. The Hells Angels had always been selective about who wore their patch. In that era, those selections followed racial lines. The Angels didn't accept black or Puerto Rican members. The Ching-A-Lings were predominantly black and Puerto Rican. They could be allies. They could ride alongside the Angels at events. They could do business together, but they couldn't wear the death head patch. They couldn't be Hell's Angels. Zito had a choice to make. Stay with the club that had made him who he was, or leave for the club he had always dreamed of joining. He chose the Angels. But first, according to federal prosecutors, he had to earn his patch. The Hells Angels, New York City. Chapter allegedly had a requirement for new members. You had to kill, or attempt to kill, a target selected by the club. It was the ultimate test of loyalty, the ultimate proof that you would do anything for the brotherhood. Zito's target was Robert Giangara, a Queens pizzeria owner, a low-level mobster with connections to organized crime. Giangara had previously shot a Hells Angels member named Cortland Chip Kando in a Manhattan bar. The Angels wanted revenge, and they wanted Zito to deliver it. On May 9th, 1979, Giangara walked out to his driveway in Elmhurst, Queens. His Cadillac Eldorado was parked where he had left it. He got in the car and sat down. Then the bomb exploded. It had been attached to the undercarriage of the Cadillac and detonated remotely using a device from a model airplane. C4 explosives. The blast tore through the vehicle. Giangara survived. Somehow he walked away without serious injury. The next day, May 10th, 1979, Chuck Zito was voted in as a full member of the Hells Angels. He was never charged with the bombing. Police tried to locate Giangara afterward, but he had vanished. He was never found. Zito's rise in the Hells Angels was rapid. He became vice president of the New York City charter. The FBI took notice and began monitoring what they called his meteoric rise, labeling him a rising star in a dangerous and well-established criminal organization. In November 1984, Zito helped found the Hells Angels New York Nomads chapter in the Hudson Valley. He became their president and held the position for 10 years. His nickname in the club was Charming Chuck. In 2005, after 25 years as a Hells Angel, Zito walked away. Hollywood was calling. His reputation as a real outlaw, a man who had lived the life that actors only pretended to live, opened doors that no acting class could. He built a career as a stuntman, bodyguard, and actor. He became friends with A-list celebrities: Mickey Rourke, Sean Penn, Sylvester Stallone. He appeared in movies and TV shows, playing tough guys because he didn't have to pretend. In 1998, Zito was at a Manhattan nightclub when he encountered Jean-Claude Van Damme. According to Zito, Van Damme slapped a woman. Zito confronted him. Words were exchanged. Then Zito dropped the action star with a single punch. Charming Chuck, indeed. But while Zito was climbing the ranks of the Hells Angels and then conquering Hollywood, the club that made him was still in the Bronx. The Ching-A-Lings didn't collapse when Zito left. They didn't fold because the Angels rejected them. They kept riding. They maintained their alliance with the Hells Angels despite everything that had happened. They built relationships with other clubs, including the Diablo's MC. They carved out their own place in the 1% world, not as prospects or hangarounds, but as a fully patched club that had earned respect the hard way. The decline. But respect doesn't make you immortal, and the streets don't care about your reputation. Every club has its peak. For the Ching-A-Lings, that peak came sometime in the 1970s. At their height, membership approached 100 men. For a regional club based in the South Bronx, that was significant. They had numbers, they had territory, they had a reputation that made people cross the street when they saw the colors coming. But the streets that made them would also break them. Heroin hit the South Bronx in the 1970s like a plague. It didn't discriminate. It took school teachers and criminals, mothers and gang members, teenagers and veterans. It hollowed out entire neighborhoods, turning vibrant blocks into ghost towns filled with nodding addicts and empty-eyed hustlers. The Ching-A-Lings weren't immune. Members who had ridden together for years started disappearing. Some got hooked and couldn't shake it. Some overdosed in apartments and weren't found for days. Some went to prison on drug charges and never came back to the life. The club that had once rolled through the Bronx 100 deep started shrinking, funeral by funeral, arrest by arrest, overdose by overdose. Then came the 1980s, and with it, a new wave of violence. Crack cocaine flooded the streets. Guns became cheaper and more plentiful. Beefs that used to end in fistfights now ended in shootings. The murder rate in the Bronx skyrocketed, and the Ching-A-Lings were caught in the crossfire. Members killed each other over disputes. Members were killed by rivals who wanted their territory. Members were killed by cops who saw the colors and reached for their weapons. The violence was relentless, and it carved chunks out of the club's roster year after year. By the 1990s, the Ching-A-Lings were down to roughly 30 dedicated members, from nearly 100 to 30. In 2 decades, they had lost more than 2/3 of their brotherhood. The men who remained had watched friends die, watched friends get locked up, watched friends destroy themselves with needles and pipes. They had buried more brothers than most people ever had. Why clubs die. This is usually where a motorcycle club dies. Most clubs don't survive this kind of decimation. The weight of loss becomes too heavy. The infrastructure collapses. Leaders get killed or imprisoned, and no one steps up to replace them. Members drift away to other clubs or back to civilian life. The colors get retired, the clubhouse gets sold, and within a few years, nobody remembers they ever existed. Some clubs get destroyed by law enforcement. The feds come in with RICO charges, flip a few members into informants, and dismantle the organization from the inside. Once the leadership is in prison and the treasury is seized, the club is finished. Other clubs get absorbed. A bigger organization rolls in and offers a choice: patch over or get wiped out. Clubs that can't defend themselves take the deal. They surrender their colors, their identity, their history. They become a footnote in someone else's story. The Ching-A-Lings faced all of these threats: the drugs, the violence, the law enforcement pressure, the opportunity to merge with a bigger club and disappear into the Hells Angels machine. They survived all of it. Part of it was stubbornness. These were men who had grown up in the South Bronx, in a place the rest of America had abandoned. They didn't know how to quit because quitting had never been an option. You survived or you didn't. There was no third choice. Part of it was loyalty. The men who stayed weren't just club members. They were family. They had grown up on the same blocks, gone to the same schools, dated each other's sisters. The bonds weren't just about patches and motorcycles. They were about shared history, shared blood, shared loss. Part of it was the code. The Harley lifestyle, they called it. Outsiders saw chaos and criminality. The Ching-A-Lings saw structure and meaning. Rules about how you treated your brothers. Rules about how you handled disputes. Rules about loyalty and respect and what you owed to the men who would die for you. And part of it was the Bronx itself. The Bronx was enough. The Ching-A-Lings never tried to expand the way other clubs did. They never opened chapters in California or Florida or Texas. They never tried to go international. They never dreamed of becoming the next Hells Angels or Bandidos or Outlaws. The Bronx was enough. This was their home. These were their streets. Hughes Avenue was their kingdom, and they didn't need an empire. While other clubs spread themselves thin trying to conquer new territory, the Ching-A-Lings stayed rooted. They knew every block, every corner, every face. They were part of the neighborhood in a way that national clubs could never be. That rootedness saved them. When the drugs and violence were tearing the club apart, the neighborhood held them together. When members died, there were always young men from the same streets ready to take their place. The pipeline never ran dry because the Ching-A-Lings weren't recruiting from across the country. They were recruiting from their own backyard. The alliances helped too. Despite everything that happened with Zito, the Ching-A-Lings maintained their relationship with the Hells Angels. The Angels had rejected most of them, told them they weren't good enough to wear the death head patch. A lesser club might have held a grudge, The Ching-A-Lings were smarter than that. They understood how the outlaw biker world worked. Alliances weren't about friendship. They were about survival. Being allied with the Hells Angels meant protection. It meant legitimacy. It meant that other clubs knew the Ching-A-Lings had backup if things went sideways. The Angels recognized the Ching-A-Lings as a legitimate one-percenter club, and that recognition opened doors. It meant they could attend events without being challenged. It meant they could do business with clubs across the country. It meant they were part of the network, even if they would never wear the most famous patch in the outlaw world. They also built a relationship with the Outlaws MC, a club founded in San Bernardino in 1961, with its own long history of violence and criminal activity. The Outlaws operated on the West Coast and in other parts of the country, giving the Ching-A-Lings connections far beyond their Bronx base. These alliances placed the Ching-A-Lings within the broader ecosystem of outlaw motorcycle clubs. They weren't isolated. They weren't alone. They had brothers in other cities who would answer the call if needed. But they never lost their independence. The Ching-A-Lings remained their own club, with their own colors, their own traditions, their own identity. They didn't become a Hells Angels support club or a Diablo's puppet chapter. They stayed exactly who they had always been, a South Bronx motorcycle club that answered to no one. In 2011, they made headlines for something unexpected. The Ching-A-Lings organized a church toy drive, collecting gifts for children in the neighborhood during the holiday season. It was a reminder that outlaw clubs are never just one thing. The same men who had fought and bled and buried their brothers were also capable of giving back to the community that raised them. Today, the Ching-A-Lings still exist. Their numbers are smaller than they were in the 1970s. The old clubhouse on Hughes Avenue has seen better days. Many of the original members are dead or in prison or too old to ride. But the club hasn't folded. The colors haven't been retired. Young men from the Bronx still prospect for the chance to wear the patch. They're not famous like the Hells Angels. They're not feared like the Bandidos. They don't make national news or inspire Hollywood movies. Most people outside of New York have never heard their name. But in the South Bronx, the Ching-A-Lings still mean something. They're still seen riding through the same neighborhoods they claimed 60 years ago. They still gather when a brother dies. They still pour beer on headstones and rev their Harleys at gravesides, keeping the old traditions alive in a world that has mostly forgotten them. The Ching-A-Lings never became a household name. They never wanted to be. But in the South Bronx, on Hughes Avenue, their name still means something. And somewhere in the Bronx, a Harley is still being revved for the dead. But not every biker empire lasts forever. On the other side of the world, one man brought down the biggest motorcycle gang in Australia. Click on the next video to see how it all fell apart. The man who collapsed Australia's biggest biker empire. Rebels gangs' mass exodus,